Described as somewhat of a Walter Mitty by one of his victims, he was about to embark on one of his most ambitious scams yet. After taking possession of 2 vehicles through means of deception, he set his sights higher and took aim at a local businesswoman's property portfolio. But rumbled at the last minute, he and his accomplice would have to take drastic action to see the acquisition through. This is the story of Kasai El Junde and Mohammed El Aboud, 2 scam artists that became killers and whose TikTok videos would help put them in prison. Welcome back to my next case. I'm Manny Haribo if you didn't already know. This is a pretty new channel, so I'd really appreciate if you took the time to comment and like if you like this content. And if you want to see more, please make sure you click the subscribe button. Now without further ado, let's get into it. This story takes place in and around a town called Potter's Bar, a mere 13 miles from central London. It's an affluent suburb, and with its proximity to London, a small house here can have a value of well over £1 million, or $1.3 million. It's here that we find a 27-year-old Romanian man by the name of Mohammed El Aboud. His TikToks show him wearing expensive clothes, staying at a beautiful house with a model, and flaunting several cars. The reality actually was that El Aboud had only been in the country for a couple of months and was actually homeless. I bet you're wondering, how could this be? I know that I definitely was. But this is a perfect example of not believing everything that you see on social media. Despite El Aboud not actually having permission to work in the UK, he'd been working for a Disney distribution centre where he met Maria Amarukai. More on her later, but the two became friends as she too was from Romania. It was after this that El Aboud started working for the Yasmin Sham restaurant as a delivery driver and met Kasai El Junde. It's this union that would later prove to be deadly. 24-year-old Syrian El Junde worked at the same restaurant as a chef, with a side order of being a con man. His usual method was latching on to mature women that came into the restaurant, then bombarding them with sentiments of love, with the intention of finding a way to exploit them later down the line. This was especially brazen, as he was actually married and had 3 children. Around the time El Aboud started working at the Yasmin Sham, El Junde had locked onto his latest mark, Anna Reich, who was a 60-year-old woman, and he'd managed to extract 2 cars from her, one being a relatively new Toyota RAV4 and an older Audi TT. He'd actually somehow tricked her into believing that he'd paid at least £30,000 into a bank account. He kept the Toyota for himself, as seen here in one of his TikTok videos, and gave the Audi to El Aboud. I believe this was because he knew that he would need El Aboud later down the line to help him with his next grift. This is Louise Cam. She's a 71-year-old businesswoman, and she ran a successful catering company with her husband before they got divorced. She was described as a lovely, caring woman who was devoted to her 2 sons, and it was because of this that she was looking to sell 2 properties that she owned, one being a shop with 3 flats above it, and then a 3-bedroom house. This deal would have been in the millions. It would have meant that she could set her sons up for life. Shockingly, it was actually for a friend that she was passed El Junde's phone number. Now, with Louise meeting El Junde for the first time at the restaurant he worked at, he was going to have to spin her some sort of story that would help her understand how he had the money to pay for these 2 properties. He tells Louise that he's got a 60-year-old girlfriend called Anna who's a multi-millionaire. And if you were wondering, yes, that is the same Anna that he's just had off for £50,000 worth of cars. He goes on to tell her that she's been working outside of the UK and that he's been tasked with finding the properties for her. At first, Louise seems happy with the idea and even starts to pay El Junde for solicitors' fees, some payments of which the bank flags as fraudulent. And when this happens, El Junde actually gets Louise to lie to the bank to get the payment. He then convinces Louise that if she was to gift him the house instead of him purchasing it, that they would save on stamp duty and other taxes involved with the purchase. Louise actually agrees to this, but then solicitors would not provide the services, as it would be unlawful and too risky. Even Louise's son Gregory had told her that he has got major doubts about this, but Louise was still falling for Al Jundi's charm. Louise is so confident in the purchase going through that weeks before they're due to complete the deal, she gives Al Jundi the keys to the 3-bedroom property on Gallants Farm Road. This is when El Aboud moves into the property, and this is where we see video after video of him flaunting the property as if they already owned it. He even has Maria Amarukai come and stay at the house several times in this period. This is where Al Jundi meets her at the property and immediately falls for her. And although she doesn't respond equally, the pair do exchange messages where they call each other king and queen and baby. But Maria was also in the dark that Al Jundi was married and had kids. Now I believe at this stage that Al Jundi and El Aboud had no intention whatsoever of hurting Louise. I think they really thought they had it in the bag. Their plan was to get Louise over to the house where El Aboud would pretend to be a solicitor and get her to fill out 2 forms. One being a power of attorney and the other being a TR1 transfer form. Now this would have given them complete legal ownership of the property. So the stage was set, and they were so certain that they were going to be able to get their mitts on this property that they'd even bought an expensive fireplace to fit in the 3-bedroom house at Gallants Farm Road. But it was using the solicitor's fees that they'd actually siphoned off from Louise. On the 26th of July 2021, Louise was seen by a friend at a local shopping centre where she was said to have been her normal, relaxed self. Little did anybody know that this was the last time that Louise's friends or family would ever see her alive. Later that day, her car was captured by CCTV turning up at the house on Gallants Farm Road. Maria was actually in the property at this time. Although she didn't meet or speak with Louise, she did see through a doorway that she was sat there speaking with the 2 men. Around 10 to 15 minutes later, Al Jundi enters the room where Maria is and tells her that he wants to buy her something expensive and nice. They then leave while Louise and El Aboud stay. It turns out later that Louise had actually refused to sign the paperwork, and Al Jundi needed an alibi with CCTV and receipts, while El Aboud dispatched Louise. After he had strangled Louise with a hairdryer electrical cord, El Aboud moved Louise's BMW into a side street so it couldn't be seen. He then picked up Maria from Al Jundi and dropped her back off at home in Coventry. But while on the way there, he actually admits to Maria about the killing. He then recants and tries to pass this off as a joke, but then asks Maria, "Would you like me to kill you too?" Now while Maria thought this was odd, she did genuinely think that he was messing around. I mean, come on, we can all see that this guy blatantly isn't firing on all 4s. So I find this pretty believable on Maria's part. In the early hours of the next day, both men wrapped Louise's body up in plastic and a duvet, then placed her in a wheelie bin, topping the bin up with garden waste. And with some help from unsuspecting friends, El Aboud moved the body from Gallants Farm Road to Al Jundi's driveway. I mean, how dumb can these guys really be? You can see Al Jundi later in the day arriving back at home and just looking at the bin. He obviously knew exactly what was in it. These guys really thought they'd got away with it. El Aboud had even gone and sold Louise's convertible BMW to an innocent party, and then gone and used that money to purchase himself new clothes and got straight back onto TikTok. Now, while El Aboud is doing all that on TikTok, Al Jundi has got Louise's phone and is texting all of her family and friends saying that she's had to go to China to escape the legal ramifications of her owing £2 million to a local businessman. Now Gregory, her son, as soon as he sees this, it doesn't wash with him. He immediately starts to try and call Louise's phone, to no avail. So he contacts the police. Police immediately get to work, tracking down Louise's car within 24 hours of it being sold, then arresting El Aboud on the 28th and Al Jundi on the 29th. This is just 2-3 days after the murder. Both men were steadfast in their denial of being involved in the murder, even after the body was discovered in a bin outside Al-Jundi's home, and inside the bin were gloves with El Aboud's DNA inside them. Not to mention his and Louise's DNA being on the cable that was used to strangle her. At trial, Anna Rake talked of the somewhat of a Walter Mitty character that had conned her out of her two vehicles. At one point, Al-Jundi had actually tried to say that Anna was the mastermind behind the whole plot to kill Louise and take her property. But as you can imagine, the jury saw right through this ploy. Maria Amarukai was also there to describe her version of events, stating that El Aboud had admitted to the killing and that she'd actually seen Louise at the house on that fateful day. Also at the trial, the TikTok videos were played. This showed the jury just how brazen, cold and calculated these two men were. And with the men both blaming each other, the jury had to actually decide on who was responsible for Louise's murder. But after deliberations, both men were found to be just as responsible.
On Thursday, the 19th of January 2023, you were convicted by the jury of the murder of Louise Cam, and I must now sentence the two of you. In relation to murder, the only sentence that can be passed on you is one of life imprisonment, and that is the sentence I will pass. The issue for this court is the minimum term that you will each serve before you are first considered for release. When it comes to the minimum term that you will serve, I make it plain that I am not ordering that you are to be released at the end of it. That will be a matter for the parole board. Only when the minimum term has been served can the parole board decide whether it is safe to release you or not. Having considered the provisions of Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020, this case has an initial start point for the minimum term of 30 years, on the basis that this was a murder done for gain. As I have indicated, the two of you had sought to defraud Louise out of her house, flats and commercial property. Figures set out in texts and other messages speak of several millions of pounds. Having identified 30 years as the appropriate initial start point for the minimum term, there are several aggravating factors to be considered in this case. Firstly, this was an attack by you that was extensively planned and premeditated. There was a significant degree of planning over a lengthy period. The messages that were uncovered in the investigation show the way in which you took advantage of her. I also note that the attack takes place in the home of Louise and her vulnerability. There were extensive efforts after the killing to conceal her body. Not only did you engage in efforts to physically conceal her body and what you had done, you also sent many, many messages to her family and closest friends, purporting to be from Louise, giving the impression she was alive and well and had disappeared with money which was yours. I need to be careful to avoid any double counting, as the start point here is one of 30 years. However, the features I have identified together do lead to a significant uplift in the appropriate minimum term. In terms of mitigating features in this case, there are none. In my judgment, this is a case with a clear intention to kill, and the only matter to pay some regard to is age and the lack of any convictions, or having only minor convictions recorded against you, and in your case, Al-Jundi, the impact on your wife and the children she will be left to bring up. El Aboud, although it might be said that Al-Jundi played the lead role in the long-running defrauding of Louise, I draw no distinction on the sentences to be passed on the two of you. The evidence clearly shows what you did and did willingly, and that you, along with Al-Jundi, did what you did out of greed. In my judgment, and taking into account all the aggravating and mitigating factors I have identified, the appropriate minimum term here is one of 35 years. The days on remand between arrest and now, which I'm told number 549 days in each of your cases, will count towards that sentence, and so the minimum term will be one of 35 years, less the 549 days. You may go down.
Now, I hope you've really enjoyed my coverage on this case. If you think I've missed anything out, make sure you let me know in the comments. And if you've liked this content and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe. But thank you and take care.